Dr. Khan, welcome to the American Glutton Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Dude, I have so many questions. Um, I think I first heard the word peptide a few years ago and just it went in one ear and out the other. But now I hear about peptides all the time. In fact, I think some of the FDA approved weight loss drugs that are currently like exploding on the marketplace are peptides. Is that right? Some of them?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, peptides, so people understand like the first peptide that became really famous was a peptide called insulin. I think
Oh,
most people have heard of insulin. It was over 100 years ago, and it was a remarkable discovery because they're able to put this chain of amino acids, which is a protein and hence a peptide, and synthesize that to do a specific task, which is obviously insulin lowers blood sugar. It sends a signal to your body to say, hey, take the sugar from your blood and go put it into the cells. So basically, people, once they understand, okay, insulin is a peptide, so what are these designer peptides doing now? They can send a signal and we can make them to send whatever signal we want, which is really cool if you think about it. So that means we can kind of manipulate the body different ways to kind of achieve the targeted outcome. And so obviously with insulin, the outcome is to lower your blood sugar, but now we have peptides that can help with weight loss. That's Ozempic or semaglutide. That's the one that became really popular because, the Kardashians did it and then all these people started doing it and it sold out everywhere and people are injecting themselves left, right, and center. But then there's also there's risk too because, semaglutide, the problem with that is when you lose weight, you lose fat and you lose muscle. And when you're losing muscle, as I'm sure your audience is aware, muscle is so important for longevity. It is an organ of longevity, really, right? And so essentially, if you're losing muscle and fat, are you really getting healthier? I don't know. I don't think you are. And so that's why you have to be careful with those weight loss peptides. But there are other peptides that we have, and I'm sure we're going to go into it, especially with what we're doing with our new peptides that we have, and that can help preserve muscle and help lose weight too.
yeah. The for me, the tricky thing about stuff like semaglutide is, I think if somebody's morbidly obese and has been obese for many years and has tried numerous attempts at dieting and nothing has worked and they cannot and just for whatever reason are not successful losing weight, I completely understand.
Yeah.
Like thinking of a lifetime course on semaglutide, I understand that. What I don't understand is somebody like Kim Kardashian, who, I mean, how much weight did she really plan to lose or need to
Yeah.
lose or want to lose? 5, 10, 15 pounds? Because like any crash diet, the weight that you take off if you don't make any lifestyle adjustments will definitely come back on. When you're in such a severe caloric deficit, you are losing lean tissue as well as fat, and so it is it's unhealthier. Certainly you might like, maybe if some chick is like, I gotta fit into this wedding dress and I don't care what I weigh for the rest of my life, I just want to fit. I understand it, but I don't think for the amount of people that just jumped on that drug. um but I think you can also, if you do enough resistance training and eat enough protein, but like if you're gonna go through all that trouble, you could just be on a diet too. You know what I mean? If you're going to go through the trouble of trying not to lose muscle mass while taking something like a Ozempic, that just makes starving yourself easy. That one's
That's
confusing.
literally what it's doing. It's just making you feel fuller and possibly just making you nauseous, so you don't want to eat as much.
Right.
And so, if you look at it from a mechanism perspective, it's what's called a GLP-1 agonist, which is basically it's a satiety signal to your body. So meaning it helps to keep you fuller. But that's why the second generation Ozempic is called Mounjaro or trizepatide. That one is actually the one I'm using primarily now. And the reason is because it doesn't just improve GLP-1, it also increases insulin sensitivity. So meaning it actually makes your body more sensitive to the insulin signal, which is really what's important for longevity, health, anti-aging, because if you have too much insulin and you become resistant, that can cause chronic inflammation, as well as it just accelerates the aging process. And so one of the main benefits of actual insulin sensitivity or of how to improve insulin sensitivity is increasing muscle mass. And that's why resistance training is so beneficial because it improves your body's insulin sensitivity. So But not everyone is necessarily going to do that, or they can't, or whatever. And so obviously there's pharmaceutical ways to do that now. And that's kind of metformin's claim to fame too. And, you know, in the longevity community, a lot of people were using metformin because they're like, oh, it improves insulin sensitivity, it may help you live longer. But then there's always like, we always find out with these drugs, when you're on them for long term, there tend to be risks with them, like they deplete your body of certain nutrients, and they may have other risks that we're not aware of. So I think because the way drugs work is they're not just one isolated target, they have multiple effects, and we don't always know what the long-term effects of those unintended side effects are really. Whereas with peptides, they're very, very targeted. So they're not going to have off-site targets or unintended side effects typically with most peptides. And so that's why they're very safe. But the issue is with, it's honestly, it's almost like experimentation, which is, it's weird, but I can tell you I'm using peptides all the time in my practice. But there isn't really many randomized control trials for a lot of these peptides, like BPC 157, for example. It's called body protection complex. They call it the Wolverine peptide. It helps with healing and regeneration, and it triggers all these different regenerative pathways. And so many people, I've used it with so many patients, and so many people have found it so helpful for different injuries and helping with healing and acute injuries especially. But there's no randomized trials in humans, to be honest. But there's probably millions of people who've done it at this point. So you have so much real world evidence that at some point you just have to say like, okay, this actually works.
Right.
And that's where it's hard for, I think, a lot of traditional doctors to to understand that, because they're like, how can so many people be doing peptides when there isn't randomized control trials done in humans yet? But it's just one of those things that because the regulatory bodies can't keep up with the innovation that's happening in medicine. And so we have all these new treatments, and peptides is one of them, and stem cells and gene therapy are another ones, which we can talk about too.
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, I find this so fascinating with something like BPC 157. Is it just that nobody owns the patent on it? Like, why is it that
Exactly.
no? Is that it?
Literally, because it's not patentable. So it's not a, there's no way to monetize it for a pharmaceutical company. So why is Pfizer or any of these companies going to pick up and do a randomized trial? Because those trials cost millions of dollars, and there's no incentive for them to do it because there's no money to be made. So
And
at the end of the day,
it would likely reduce their sales in another department on a drug that they do have the rights to.
that's the thing. There's so many peptide, man, the peptide world, like in Russia, you got to hand it to the Russians, because the Russians have been using peptides for almost like 25, 30 years, and they have the most literature on this by far. And you know, you know, they're not corrupted by the pharmaceutical industries. And I mean, many other countries too, but Russia's, when it comes to peptides, that's what they've been researching for many, many years. And if you look at a lot of the Russian literature and on this, there's so much evidence for so many different issues. And like, you know, from different chronic diseases, autoimmune conditions, chronic fatigue, COVID, like, and like, especially COVID is like, I mean, now there's talk about COVID again. And like, it just, you know, it's just like one of those things. It's like, why aren't we talking about like all these interventions that can keep people healthier and reduce the burden of disease, instead of just waiting for something to happen and then just saying, well, like, oh, well, you know, get vaccinated, or there's no other option. Like, there are other options that can be very beneficial, and peptides are one of them. There's one in particular called thymolin that's been used in many studies in Russia, and basically looking at how it can reduce COVID mortality, morbidity, and it can help with recovery, because it stimulates your thymus gland, which stimulates your immune system. And so again, it's just sending a signal to your immune system to boost it. So it's so cool if you think about it, right? It's like because everyone wants to boost their immune system, but like, you know, like with vitamins and stuff like that, it's kind of like you're not really sure if it's actually doing anything. Whereas with a peptide, you know for sure it's going to do something.
Yeah.
So I think that's the cool thing about them.
I had such a weird experience at the gym where, you know, I have my headphones on. I usually don't really, I'm not chatty with people. And a guy was on vacation, and he came up to me, and it's very uncommon. He knew who I was, and but like, the people who are at the gym know me, but I don't, but it's not a thing. But this guy was from out of town, and he comes up to me and he's like, dude, I really like you a lot, and I got to tell you about this peptide. And it was so weird, but he was talking, and I can't remember the name. I wish I could, but he was like, I do a cycle of this peptide once a year, and it's anti-aging, and I'm going to live forever, and it creates a longer telomere or something. Like, he used all these words, and then that was it. That's all he wanted to tell me. He wanted to tell me to check out this thing. And I like asked my doctor about it. And my doctor was like, I don't know anything about that. And so I kind of dropped it. But I think it is a world where there's like all this stuff, and like some of it, as we know, like, you can't just discount peptides. Insulin. I have a kid with type 1 diabetes. She's been using insulin. I had no idea that was a peptide. She's been using that for 15 years. So like,
Yeah.
it's keeping her alive. Some of them are doing something clearly, and it is, if these things would work against the profits of the pharmaceutical companies in some cases, and they would have no incentive to really look into them. And that's how we get FDA approved drugs.
And that's the problem, and that's why we need to rethink the whole way we're doing it, which is a whole systemic issue. But because other countries have regulatory frameworks that are much more progressive than the way FDA has it, where they're allowing for a lot of these more innovative treatments because they're safe, number one, they're not harmful, and they have potential good evidence for them. So it's always about benefit versus risk. Or in medicine, we call it number needed to treat versus number needed to harm. That's a technical statistical term, but basically the gist is how much benefit can this have and what's the risk in it? And so these treatments, peptides, have very little risk and they have a lot of potential benefit. So, and in Japan, I love Japan because I worked there for a bit, and I'm going to be working there next summer because they're so far advanced when it comes to gene editing and cell therapy and whatnot. And they have this framework where they're allowing doctors to do anything that's phase one investigational and allow it to use it in patients as long as it's deemed safe. And they have a framework on how they deem it safe. And so whereas with FDA, they're like, no, and it has to go through like all phase 3 trials, and it has to go through this rigorous process because everything, they're treating it like a harmful drug. They don't understand that not everything is like for example, like if you have rheumatoid arthritis, they put you on like something called methotrexate, which like suppresses your immune system. So, and it can really increase your risk of cancer, depletes your body of nutrients. So you better have a lot of evidence for that if you're going to be prescribing that to people, because there's all these potential harm. So yes, it has to obviously go through many trials and has to go through this like 5-10 year process. But for something like a peptide or like stem cells, which are pretty much harmless, like they're not, and we know that now because there's so much studies on them, like they're very safe. And why not, allow doctors to start using them because we know they're safe and they can be potentially beneficial with little risk and a lot of upside. And so that's the way the Japanese do it, and I think that makes perfect sense to me because the risk is very low and the potential benefits high. And like back to the anti-aging longevity thing, I think he was probably talking about epithalon. It's a peptide that increases
Yes,
telomere length.
that's right.
And
Epithalon.
yeah, and so have a I don't know if you use Threads. I started using Threads sometimes. So I made a Threads post or whatever you call it about a longevity peptide protocol, and it includes epithalon and a few others, and like growth hormone peptide, and you can cycle them a few times a year for longevity and anti-aging. And it's not that you're never going to die, but you'll probably slow down aging for sure, because especially the two of the biggest reasons we age is is our immune system aging. And so peptides can help with that by keeping your thymus gland strong. And then BPC helps with gut health and gut inflammation, which is obviously a big driver in aging as well. So peptides have really unique benefits in anti-aging and longevity too. So a lot of people, I think a lot of doctors who kind of know what's up, they're using them in their practice.
Okay, I have so much to ask you. I want to go back to one point you made specifically about the pharmaceuticals and ask you if I'm correct on this. But in thinking about the ways that pharmaceutical companies are currently marketing and selling these weight loss drugs, the one you mentioned that you like, that the brand name is Mounjaro.
Mounjaro, yeah.
Now, is it true that whatever pharmaceutical company is selling Mounjaro, they're just taking that drug, tirzepatide, and adding some vitamin to it or something like that?
Like so they can patent it.
Right.
So
But
you can get a generic trizepatide and it's the same thing at a fraction of the cost.
at a
And
yeah,
but
so that's the
like
scam they're running.
it's not FDA approved. So they'll say it's not allowed. So it's crazy.
Right. But what they're adding to it is not it's not really changing it.
No, it's not changing the effect of the molecule at all.
Right. So that, I think, when I looked at that, I was like, this is this is a scam. This is a big business scam.
These podcasts are so important, and I think it's raising awareness against the narrative, because the narrative still, pharmaceutical companies, they're like, I always, my analogy, because I was an early investor in Tesla, so I understand Tesla really well, and the analogy is the same, which is the oil companies wanted Tesla to go bankrupt, and in fact they almost succeeded. Tesla was like this close, like literally one quarter away from going bankrupt, and that was because it was the most heavily shorted stock in history. So all these big oil companies were shorting the shit out of it, and then on top of that you had all this FUD, which is fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which is basically in the mainstream media saying Tesla's not making money, they're going to go out of business, blah blah blah. And like for someone like me, I was like, I got scared at certain points, but I just kept buying more and more. And then, because I believe the company, and I also understood where I think the sentiment was shifting, which is people want electric vehicles. So I didn't let the mainstream media stuff scare me. But and then lo and behold, like a couple of years later, everyone's like, "Oh, Tesla's the best company ever." It's like so, but it's like, and pharmaceutical companies are doing that same thing, which is they're able to control the narrative through media to say that these things are dangerous or they can be harmful or they don't work. But it's just the same thing. It's the same playbook, which is just FUD.
Yeah, no, you hear about one fatal accident with the self-driving car, and suddenly it's like, well, we can't have self-driving cars. And yet, if you heard about how many fatal accidents there were with human-driven cars every day, I don't know how we could get back in a car ever.
Exactly. And that's exactly what they do. It's called availability heuristic, which is, it's a cognitive bias, which is like if humans see like an airplane crash and they hear about it in the media, they get scared about going on an airplane because that's available to us. And so we get biased and we think that going on airplanes can be dangerous when airplanes are like 1,000 times safer than going in a car.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's the same cognitive biases we have, and people, and they understand that they're not dumb. Like they're multi-billion-dollar companies and corporations. They understand how to manipulate people to get them to do kind of what they want. And right now they really don't want them to get into all these regenerative therapies, I would say, which include peptides, because they're all signals that can reprogram your body and get you actually healthier and prevent disease, and actually put you in remission or cure disease. And that's not good for business, right?
Yeah. Okay, here's the second thing that something you were talking about made me think of and want to ask you is, I have 4 daughters, a granddaughter, and a wife. I'm surrounded by women. And one of the things I've noticed is that as men age, there's a lot of stuff that can be done for men to feel younger, to not experience any decline in whatever their hormones was. And I'm constantly advertised. I see billboards for this all the time.
Yeah.
I see much less for women, and I've heard that some of this hormone stuff, and women who literally go through something called the change of life, where their hormones completely change from what they were, which, and from everything I've gleaned, is not a very fun experience. I'm not seeing a lot in that arena. And so what I wanted to ask you is, these peptides, because I know mainstream medicine seems to work male to female pretty equally, but then the kind of alternative stuff doesn't. Do the peptides, are there courses for women that are just as useful?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, for hormones, because women hormonal regulation is obviously a lot more complicated than men, and that's why a lot of practitioners don't really understand how to do that stuff properly. So you have to know how to optimize your hormones based off like not just blood work, but sometimes you have to use like salivary testing, urine testing, genetic testing to figure out how their body metabolizes hormones. So there's a lot, I guess it can be a lot more tricky. And so not a lot of doctors are trained in that, but there are definitely doctors, there's a peptide institute that trains female and male doctors. And I know a lot of the female doctors use peptides all the time on females, because a lot of females, what happens to them after they have menopause, they're not eating much, but they can't lose weight no matter how much they try. And that's because of the hormonal issues, and peptides can help with that as well, because it can just help with metabolism and processing, because it's not just there's obviously there's calories in and calories out, and like no one's saying that's not true. It's just what's the underlying mechanisms as to why that doesn't always apply in certain cases. You know what I mean? Where it's like one side gets shifted. So because your body's not metabolizing because of hormonal dysregulation, so the calories you're putting in may not get processed as well as someone who's has a healthier hormonal profile. So they can
Yeah.
basically affect
I,
metabolism. So it's not just because everyone's just like, oh, just cut your calories, eat less, and exercise more, but it's not that simple.
Well, I think that also it will come down to how much your body is resisting what you're doing. So, like, for me, I've noticed that my body is far less resistant to a mild caloric deficit. It's just not hard for me to hit a small calorie deficit. I get in this groove, and my wife can do that. And again, like, the amounts of weight that I have wanted to lose versus the amount of weight that she has wanted to lose is very different. I've lost almost 300 pounds. And when I'm like, I got to do a photo shoot, I want to lose 5 pounds. It's just like, okay, I'm going back to this thing that's worked for me for years now. She has never wanted to lose more than 6 or 7 pounds. And those 6 or 7 pounds are really, really stubborn. And I notice when she starts onto a course where she's like, I'm going to lose this 5 pounds, she hits a time of the month and it just is like her body is throwing everything against her. Like, it's just much harder in some instances for her to do that. So I do think hormones and that the menstrual cycle, like that, they are a much more complicated species.
For sure. And the cool thing is though, if you work with like a good, there's so many good doctors now who know this type of stuff, but like it's there's like a peptide called CJC and ipamorelin, which basically boosts your body's own production of growth hormone. So it's not actually giving you growth hormone, but it's just sending a signal to increase growth hormones production, and then that can help with weight loss recovery. It also has anti-aging properties, and it's something you can easily add on for people who are plateaued. And I think those type of interventions again have very low harm, and but it's also one of those things, it's not super accessible because I feel like the majority of people still doing peptides are just doing them, they're just ordering them off some website and just doing it on their own, reading online. So it has to be like doctors at some point have to accept that this is happening, and that you have to educate yourself on it so that you can help your patients and not just say like, oh, I don't know anything, like, you're just doing your own shady stuff, good luck. Like,
Yeah,
so you have to educate and try to help your patients.
right. When the guy said that peptide that you mentioned, epithalon, I think,
Yeah.
is that it? Yeah. So he says this word to me. It's almost like he's telling me the secret to the universe in the gym. And I'm like, dude, I'm just trying to work out. Okay, epithalon. But I looked it up. I asked my doctor, and my doctor was like, I don't know anything about it, but I think you can get it. And I looked, and it's like you're literally just ordering a vial of something from a website. Like, I could never do that simply because, like, I don't know. It just seemed so like I'm gonna order something on Amazon that's injectable. Like, the whole thing seemed crazy to me.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because I always thought like it would be crazy too for like most people, but then there's so many people doing it now. And I prefer, my obviously preference is you do it under a supervision of a doctor, just because, or like an experienced practitioner, so at least they can guide you on like, quality, because there are obviously a lot of manufacturers who don't have good quality peptides, and then also like dosing regimens and like how to cycle on and off safely in case in case you do get side effects. Like they're just, you don't want to be, yes, peptides are relatively safe, but they're not, it's not to the point where it's just like, you just want to be willy-nilly with it and just experiment and see what happens.
Yeah, no, something like that for me, I would want somebody who has some knowledge of it to say, here's
And
exactly what you do, and I'm getting good pharmaceutical grade stuff.
so many health coaches, like even like Ben Greenfield is a perfect, like he knows so much about peptides. Like when I went on his podcast, we chatted about them, and he's super well knowledgeable, and he coaches people like people like him are very accessible to get coaching from. And just even if you do one session with them, at least they give you an overview of like how to dose it properly, how to do it properly, all that stuff.
Right. Okay. You mentioned other peptides that reduce muscle wasting. What
Yeah,
are
so
those?
I mean, I have to talk about this since it's like it's I mean, it's really a breakthrough technology. So the company is called Mini Circle. I'm their chief medical officer, but I'm not the inventor. The scientists who invented it are much smarter than me. They're these two really brilliant guys, and they came up with what's called the world's first reversible plasmid gene therapy. So plasmid is of bacterial origin, but there's no live bacteria in there. So it's basically just a circle of DNA, hence the name mini circle. But traditionally, gene therapies were viral vectors. So when you have a viral vector, they're A, expensive to manufacture, and B, once you give a virus to your body, there's always a risk it can translocate. There's been case reports of even deaths. So there are potential risks with viral gene therapies. And once you have a viral vector, you can't repeat it. It's usually lasts 5 to 10 years, and then that's kind of it. But this one, it's not reversible. So this one, it's reversible, meaning you could take an antibiotic and you can get out of your body if you want for whatever reason. And the other cool thing about it, because it's a plasmid and there's no live bacteria in there, it doesn't actually have any risk in terms of causing like infection or causing any sort of issues that way. So it's very safe. And basically what this gene therapy platform does is it can allow you to secrete any peptide or protein in the body for up to 1.5 to 2 years. So instead of having to inject yourself every day, because the peptides have a short half-life, and so instead of having to inject yourself every day, you can just do this plasmid gene therapy for whatever peptide you're targeting, and it can last for 1.5 to 2 years. So the first product that we have is called follistatin gene therapy. So follistatin is a peptide that's been around for over 20 years. And the reason why bodybuilders and everyone was so into follistatin was because it inhibits myostatin. So like if you've ever seen those Belgian blue cows, like those jack cows, like they have so much muscle, it's because they have a myostatin deficiency.
Oh,
It's
wow.
because enough myostatin, but that's like a genetic mutation where they're just not making any myostatin, so they just put on a shitload of muscle and they're just jacked for no reason. But follistatin, so that's why a lot of bodybuilders were like, oh, I want to use follistatin, like it can inhibit myostatin. But the problem was the half-life was so short, so it wouldn't really work because you'd have to inject yourself 2-3 times a day and you have to do it for months, and no one, like that's really not sustainable for most people at least. And so this technology allows us to do the follistatin gene therapy. So you just do one injection like in your belly and it lasts for 1.5 to 2 years. And what follistatin does, it basically inhibits myostatin, so allows you to put on more lean body mass. It gives you more energy. It reduces systemic inflammation. And in mice, it's been shown to extend lifespan by like 30%. So it has anti-aging longevity benefits as well. But the coolest thing is it's very anti-catabolic. So it can, for people who are aging, and obviously you start losing muscle after age 30 naturally if you're not doing resistance training. And so as you're aging, you're losing more and more muscle every year. So you have to fight it quite hard. And so this can help to fight that, like, it can help to shift it. So you're more anabolic and anti-catabolic. So you're not going to lose muscle. And as we were talking about earlier too, like we just finished our phase 1 clinical trial, which will be published soon. But basically, we did DEXA scans on everyone. And the cool thing was that people who were losing weight, even people who weren't doing resistance training and not really eating that much protein, they lost no muscle. They just lost fat, purely fat. So it's
Whoa.
really cool.
I mean, that's insane. I even eating a good deal of protein, because I've done a lot of diets and a lot of DEXA scans, and I found that even on something like the keto diet, which you're eating a lot of meat, um, when I was losing weight, I was losing 30 to 40% lean tissue also, which was so disappointing. Like I had to get so unbelievably specific with my diet and so slow with my weight loss in order to maintain lean tissue. It was like, it's really tough. So
I'm glad, yeah, it's glad it's good you're sharing that because people don't understand how tough that is.
it's really hard. I mean, when you look at basically, if you want to preserve all your lean tissue, you kind of have to exist as a bodybuilder. And those guys are always either overeating or dieting. And when they diet, they work out a lot and they eat a lot of protein. And like they're figuring it out scientifically, like to the gram. And they're also doing some drugs that help them out, which
But there is a I've been doing natural bodybuilding myself for like 11 years now, and so I'm very well versed in it. And like if you're doing natural bodybuilding, I think it is the best thing for long health, as long as you don't have to necessarily go to extreme dieting to get like shredded, but applying the principles of natural bodybuilding, which is periodization and training, and also
yeah.
cyclical, like carb refeeds and stuff like that. Like if you do it in an intelligent way, you can really preserve lean body mass.
And also giving your body a break. Your body needs a break from dieting after a while, and you have to maintain for a while to like reset your hormones. But so I'm not going to remember any of the words you said. This plasmatic gene therapy. I'm
Yeah.
sure I said it wrong. Um, these guys figured out a way to deliver a course of drugs for a year and a half that would otherwise require 3 doses a day in one shot.
Yeah, exactly. I know it sounds like science fiction. So that's why that's why it's a technological breakthrough, which will be published in Nature in the next few years. But it's a patent, so you don't necessarily want to tell people all about it.
Sure.
But yeah, no, it's going to be it's a very breakthrough technology because we're going to make different. We can make different gene therapies for so many different peptides, but also for rare conditions like cystic fibrosis and there's one called retinitis pigmentosa where you're missing a peptide, and we can make a gene therapy for that and replace it in your body, and we can even, you can treat those conditions as well. So there's so many applications, and that's why, we got two of our main investors. One of them is Peter Thiel, the PayPal guy, and then
Sure.
our other main investor, Sam Altman, the Chat GPT guy. So we got two good, well-known people who are involved, and it's exciting because I think we can disrupt a lot of mainstream medicine, hopefully, with it, especially the pharmaceuticals, because you can do these different gene therapies and kind of reprogram your body and make them healthier, prevent you from disease, chronic disease, and slow down aging too.
Okay, when I think about medication, I take a medication for my blood pressure, and I've been taking it for 15 years, and I could probably come off, but uh, I just haven't. I'm trying to figure out what it costs without insurance. If I'm just trying to think of what a year's worth of, like, is this shot going to cost 100 grand?
Actually, there is a company. So yes, it is 100. And there is one other competitor that has something similar, but they use viral vector, and it costs. I think it costs $100,000. Yeah,
Yeah.
ours is not 100,000. Ours is right now is 25,000. However, we are working. Our goal with it is to eventually make it like a few $1,000s, so it's much more affordable. It just with new technology, just like you remember TVs, like TVs used to cost, like those plasma TVs used to cost like $100,000, and now they cost a few thousand, right? So I think anytime with technology, it's Moore's law. There's going to be innovation in manufacturing, and there's going to be more demand, and there's going to be reduction in like cost curve reduction. So I think over the next few years, the goal for us, like as part of the company, is definitely to make it in the hopefully in the next year by like bring it down by $10,000, and then and eventually make it a couple thousand, like $5,000 would be the goal. And I think at that point be a much more affordable for a lot of people.
Yeah, but I mean, listen, okay, $25,000 is a hell of a lot more reasonable than $100,000. But like, I just thought of like what I spend, and I know that you're, I'm sure somebody's going to try to do something with this to start working on autoimmune diseases and all of that stuff. But like, I think about my daughter. I don't know how this would affect type 1 diabetes, but I think about her who's got to give herself boluses of insulin all day long and get a continuous basal dosage of insulin. And so she's constantly medicating herself, constantly, every day, all day long, which is like the drug you mentioned first would require 3 doses a day. And
Exactly.
we spend tens of thousands of dollars a year on her insulin, even with
Yeah.
insurance covering a huge portion of it. So, $25,000 for the dosage of a drug that lasts a year and a half is not doesn't seem insane, especially when it's brand new and with time and getting it out there, and the more people who are doing this, the price will come down.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the right way to frame it. And I think for type 1 diabetes, just since we're talking about it, I think there's so much interesting research going on with stem cells. So I think you're really going to see in the next few years that we're going to be able to hopefully like cure those patients in a sense, because now we have what are called gene edited stem cells, where you can make what are called islet cells. And islet cells, as you probably know, are kind of like the cells in the pancreas that secrete and produce insulin. And what happens in type 1 diabetes, for whatever reason, their body attacks their islet cells, and they're damaged and they don't produce enough insulin. And so you can actually, now they're doing clinical trials, so it's not ready yet, but it will be in the next few years for sure, where you can actually inject islet cells directly into the pancreas, and you can you can basically regenerate the pancreas, and then you're secreting, your body's making insulin, and you can get off insulin.
Yeah, no,
There's with that, yeah.
I looked at a clinic in South America to take her down to do stem cell stuff, and they basically said like it's going to cost you a couple $100,000, and we can't guarantee anything with her pancreas.
That much. Okay, well, come see me. I do stem cells in Mexico, and I do them in Dubai. I don't. We'll talk, but I
Okay.
can do. can do them for your daughter, and we won't charge that much. That's crazy.
Yeah, I was
And
just
we
like, I can't spend a couple $100,000 if you can't tell me this is going to work, you know?
Yeah, we'll chat. We have a whole product. We have a whole autoimmune protocol we do using peptides and stem cells, and we're the only group in the world that has the gene edited stem cells as well, like the second generation. So, so we can help. We can probably help her. And like I think, at least even if she can't get off of it, she might be able to decrease the dose for now,
Right.
which is something that can help a lot of people that way. And like I think, and that's the thing with chronic disease. Like I've had patients with lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, who've been able to get off their meds in remission, and then other ones who get a lot better, but not necessarily off their meds. So there's variability in response still, and we're still figuring out like exact dosing. But either way, is like the point is it has so much potential. Like stem cells too have a lot of benefit and very little harm. But the problem with stem cells is the lack of regulation outside of US, and there's all these medical tourism and predatory marketing and price gouging and like this type of stuff, right? Where they're just like kind of like making it into a huge business where it's like it's not. And that's where I feel like that's kind of why I got into space too, is because like I was always interested in regenerative medicine, but I was always skeptical about all these stem cell clinics. But then when I started learning more and reading more, there is definitely something to it. It's just that the problem with a lot of these companies is they're making it seem like they're making it they're using all these celebrities and all these people to market and giving false hope to a lot of people, which I don't like. And
Yeah.
like I'm very honest about what it works for and what doesn't work for, and what we can do and what we can't do. Whereas I feel like with a lot of these companies, they're just like, yeah, you can do stem cells for everything. It doesn't. It just
Right.
So
Anecdotally, I have experienced two people who I love very much having very different results, but one was for injuries to soft tissue, which seemed to miraculously get better with stem cell therapy. He had a problem in his neck and a problem in his shoulder, and stem cells kept him out of surgery. And then I had somebody very close to me with neurodegenerative disease who was promised the world through stem cells, and nothing helped. So
yeah,
I do
that's
think there are different things.
exactly. And that's where you have to understand dosing and quality of stem cells and like different cell lines. And like these companies don't understand that. They're just business. I know the people who own those companies, they're businessmen. They're not scientists, and they get scientists to work for them, but they're not really interested in innovation and advancing the science. They're interested in profits. And so it's just not the best approach. But for neurodegenerative conditions, they're tough conditions to treat, and you have to counsel the patients properly, and then also not get false hope, right? But that's why we I worked in Dubai. Like I was there for 4 months basically this winter working there. And the reason I worked there was because they've been doing stem cells there for 10 years. They've been approved there. Because in Canada and US, stem cells are still like a very highly regulated area. I'm doing a clinical trial in Canada, so I'm allowed to do stem cells here, but not like all types of stem cells, and only for certain things. So I have to travel, I have to take my patients. But in Dubai, I got so much experience, and like you learn when you travel. When I went to Dubai, and then I went to Europe, and then I went to Japan, and then obviously South America, you get to kind of see the different groups around the world are doing stem cells, and then you can kind of like learn what the best practices are. But I feel like a lot of these companies in South America, Colombia especially, like I've had so many patients go there with like not good results, and like or even get worse. And so it's just like you gotta be careful where you go.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. The I think I've always kind of been like, when mainstream medicine picks it up, then I'll kind of trust it. That's kind of been my thing. I was put on a lot of weird diets as a kid, but my mom was super into like, I mean, fucking some really weird diets, and they didn't work. And so I kind of like have been hearing about these things for a while and kind of disregarding them. However, the thing with Monjourno was pretty eye-opening to me, because that is a peptide that the FDA is saying really works for what it's prescribed for. And you hear people do lose weight. It makes not eating as much not unpleasant, right? Which is the hardest part about dieting. So if that's working, and you see the way it's being manipulated a bit, where they're adding, vitamin D or vitamin C or something, or whatever they're adding to it that is like practically inert, but that's the way they can charge more money and patent this concoction. It does seem to me that there's probably a bunch of stuff out there that could be helpful. And then I have weird guys whispering in my ear, the fountain of youth in the gym that just gets me, that
Yeah.
just sticks
Like,
my
oh,
mind on it.
check this out. I got the latest thing for you, bro. I
Yeah.
know you got to watch out for the bros. But and that's the problem with this whole field, right? Like I'm obviously not a traditional doctor, but in the sense, I mean, I'm a medical doctor, but obviously I do things not traditionally. And most of the patients I see have already been through the conventional system. They failed, or they tried, or they couldn't, or whatever, and or they're trying to avoid surgery or whatever. So I can tell you that after traveling and working in different parts of the world, that you cannot trust mainstream medicine in North America, and that's just a reality of it. And like it really opened my eyes when I went to Japan and Europe, because they're, especially those, and even Middle East, because they're all very developed countries. It's not like they're third world. They're not like Colombia. Like, no offense to Colombia, but like, you're not. It's not really a good country. You know what I mean? It's not like they're successful and they're, you know what I mean. So Japan's a very successful, innovative medicine, technology, advanced country, and they do a lot of the innovation that comes in the world. And so when I saw the fact they've been doing stem cells there for 10 years, yet the FDA still says they're dangerous and they're illegal, then it just started making me think about everything that I've been told. And I was just, and that's where I really started going down this rabbit hole. And then it just opened up my eyes. So yeah, you can't, unfortunately, you can't really trust a lot of what you're being told by mainstream medicine, even a lot of your regular doctors, because they don't know themselves. They don't educate themselves outside of what they're told in like their industry funded talks and all that stuff. So you have to really self-educate, which is what people are doing now. But you have to, but then there's so many gurus who are claim to be experts, and that's why you got to find the right people. And that's why I know you've like brought on Spencer. Like, Spencer is a great example of like how he debunks a lot of the bullshit out there when it comes to fitness and health, because there's so many gurus in the space who just talk about the most nonsense stuff. Like, I saw this one guy who's just saying like cold plunges are the best way to burn fat. Like, you're gonna lose so much fat if you're gonna do cold plunges. Like, what are
Right.
you talking about?
Yeah.
Like,
No, it's the level of absurdity, and there's also the problem, I think, with social media where, like, I can look at the abundance of omega-6 fatty acids in the American diet and go like, that's not beneficial for health, the amount of omega-6s we're going. But then you have people going like, if you put a drop of seed oils in your body, you're poisoning yourself. And that's also not true. You know what I mean? Like, there's got to be some middle ground. Yeah, I think on average, we consume too much omega-6 from the perspective of health. So lowering that is not a bad thing, but treating, a little bit of sesame oil on some rice occasionally is not harmful.
and there's so much individualization and customization that you can do using. I personally, for when it comes to nutrition, I love using like there's a company called the DNA company. It uses nutrigenomics, try to still based off your genetics, like what type of food would be optimal for you. And then you can also use a continuous glucose monitor, like a CGM, to see how you respond to different blood sugars. And you can do blood tests too for different inflammatory markers, so you can really figure out what works best for your body. Because I have paid like I work with the Peterson family, and like, because I went on Michaela Peterson's podcast, and like Jordan Peterson and all those people, and like they're like strictly carnivore. Like, they do
Yeah.
not like I was at their house. They do not eat, like, there was no carbs to be found. There was just literally meat, more meat. And I was like, okay, this is very interesting. And they're like, but they feel amazing. They're like, it changed their life. They had chronic, like, so many issues before, and they like, they can't eat anything, but it works for them,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean it works for everyone. And so that's where you get into problems, where people start seeing all these gurus and fad programs. And that's why, like, my area, obviously I know a lot about nutrition, but I always defer to Spencer, because Spencer is like the best when it comes to that stuff. He knows his shit, and he debunks all that.
Yeah. Okay. So your company is working on preparing to release this thing, which you can amazingly give a course of a drug for a year and a half with one shot. That's not, you guys are not selling that yet. What
It
are
is
the,
it is being, actually, it's
oh, it
available
is.
now.
Oh,
We've done it for some, we're doing for a lot of, obviously, billionaires, pro athletes, many people, and there are some people who are just into anti-aging longevity. We've been talking to Brian Johnson, the guy who spends $2 million a year on his body. He's probably gonna be doing it soon. I'm talking to a lot of people to get it done. So but I know it is expensive. But like you said, I think for people who want to invest in something for long-term health and stuff, it can potentially be worth it.
Okay, but is that the nuts and bolts of your practice, just that one thing, or are you working with peptides in the normal scale also?
No, yeah, yeah. So by training, I'm a sports medicine and interventional pain doctor. So I inject people for a living from head to toe to help them with injuries and pain. And I use primarily peptides and regenerative therapies like stem cells and PRP and stuff like that. So that's what I do day to day. But I am getting more, but because we're doing so much on the manufacturing side now with the gene therapy and cell therapies, and we're opening up clinics kind of all over the world. So I'm focusing a lot on that stuff. But we do have like our company is called Eterna, like Eternal without a L. But Eterna, basically, we're focusing on any chronic, like basically all chronic diseases, really, because if you think about all like chronic diseases, they're all rooted in the same molecular mechanisms, which is like chronic inflammation, mitochondrial dysfunction, cellular senescence. Like there's all these different hallmarks. They're called the 10 hallmarks of aging. And essentially they underlie most chronic diseases. So instead of looking at like traditional medicine was always like, oh, you need to go see a stomach specialist if you have stomach problems. You need to go see a liver specialist if you have liver problems, which works great for acute medicine. For acute medicine is brilliant. Like it's beautiful if you need surgery, and you need those type of acute care type of stuff is amazing. But for chronic disease, that model doesn't work very well. And there's a lot of people with chronic illnesses that aren't getting the care that they need. And that's where cell and gene therapy repair can be really helpful. So we even have cell therapies that I learned in Japan, like something called dendritic cells and natural killer cells. They're immunotherapy then they can use for cancer. And they have like stage 4 cancer patients that are still alive today, which is crazy, with that were doing chemo, but the chemo obviously didn't work, and then they did the immunotherapy, and they're able to save their lives. So there's all these like interesting cell therapies and gene therapies that are coming up, but that's really, I would say, my focus now is cell and gene therapy.
Yeah, and that stuff isn't 25. I mean, I'm sure some of it's very expensive. But
But I mean, I guess you got quoted like 100,000 or something crazy for stem cells. Usually stem cells, they start at 10, 15,000 and we go up to like 25, 30,000, depending on what you need. Yeah.
right. Okay, amazing. And the peptides are not astronomical either. I'm thinking like for a normal person who's like interested in weight loss, has had long-term problems, is scared of muscle wasting, if they come to you, they don't have to take out a mortgage on their house.
Oh, exactly. And the peptides I agree with you. What's the lowest hanging fruit, right? I think it's hormone optimization, like after lifestyle, obviously, like hormone optimization, and then like peptides, because they're not very expensive and they can change a lot of people's lives.
Yeah, amazing. I do. It does seem very exciting. It's a field where for a long time I was very dismissive of it, and I guess I open my eyes and go like, well, the big pharmaceutical companies are using these things. Why?
Yeah,
And they're available, they're there. Why not look into them?
exactly. Just the other ones, unfortunately, aren't patentable, so they're not FDA approved. But they're literally there's pharmacies you can even get them from now in the U.S. and they're pretty accessible.
Well, yeah, I mean that one you mentioned that when they put the name Monjourno on it and add something to it, which doesn't change the thing itself, right? I mean, that to me is the craziest scam ever. And if you look at the price online, it's so much more expensive.
It is. And I feel like that's such a good analogy because I think that can be eye opening for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Dr. Khan, this has been fascinating. I can't wait to talk to you in private about the Fountain of Youth one, the epithelion or something. I'm utterly perplexed and interested in that. And I think this gives people a lot to think about. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.